Trends are a funny thing, aren't they? Now, about 15 years ago, an MPV was the go-to choice for families after loads of space and loads of seating room too. But today, well, they're not quite as popular and they've been replaced by cars like this. It's the new SEAT Tarraco. It's a 7-seater SUV that promises the space and practicality you get with an MPV, but that chunky off-road look that you'd want from an SUV. So if you're considering a car like a Ford Galaxy, why should you be looking at this? That's what we're going to find out today. If the design of the Tarraco looks familiar to you, there's a reason for that. It's based on the same platform as the Skoda Kodiaq, but whereas the Kodiaq takes a slightly more grown-up angle towards design, we feel that the Tarraco has a slightly sportier edge to it. This car in particular, well, in white, it might not be the easiest colour to keep clean in wintertime, but it definitely stands out from the crowd. But at the back, there's a full-width light bar, which is very on trend at the moment, and the Tarraco also gets SEAT's new handwriting style badge design, which I'm not totally sold on, but let us know what you think of it in the comments section below. What are we looking for from a family SUV? Well, we want practicality, don't we? So in the Tarraco, we've got some nice deep bin sections, some decently sized cup holders, and some nice deep door bins too, which can actually take quite large bottles. Elsewhere, we've got some really good robustness too. The materials aren't too bad, but they're going to stand up to the test of time, and certainly to family life, which is another plus point. In the middle, this latest car has a large central touchscreen, but I've actually had a couple of issues with this. It's kept crashing when I've been attaching my Apple CarPlay via a cable. So actually going for a used example might be better, because I found the screen in the older Tarraco really bulletproof. So that's a definite plus point for picking a used one. Elsewhere, things are nice. We've got some clear and physical controls on the multifunction steering wheel, which are better than the slightly touch-sensitive ones you get elsewhere in the Volkswagen Group. However, the ones down here for the heating and ventilation, they are kind of this semi-touchscreen type setup, and they can be a little bit imprecise, but I've been getting on with them just fine during my time with the car. Overall, very pleasant, very nicely made, and most importantly, sturdy. It's going to handle whatever you can throw at it. Ahead of me, in typical Volkswagen Group fashion, we've got a digital dial set up for your speed and for other key information, and you can tweak it to show a variety of different screens and layouts. You're well catered for when it comes to space in the back of the Tarraco. I've got plenty of legroom and I've got loads of headroom too. The only thing is, with this dark headliner and the dark seats, it feels like, well, quite a dark place to be. It doesn't feel quite as spacious as a car like the SEAT Alhambra, for instance, the dedicated MPV, which had that kind of airy, glassy minibus feel to it, which in truth is what it was. This is much more like an SUV. You've got a high position and you're sitting quite high up too. That said, in this FR grade car, we have got heated seats, which are quite pleasant on a cold day like today. And we do have a USB-C charger and a 12-volt charger too. So you'll be able to top up all your devices while you're back here. One thing I would add though, is that there's quite a large transmission hump. So the person in the middle is going to have to push their feet either side. So if you are going to wanting to seat people 3 abreast here, they're not going to be all that comfy. Things are a little bit tight in the very rearmost seats of the Tarraco. I feel a bit like I'm a structural part of the car, but having said that, I am 5'11", and the seat here has just enough room ahead of it to get another person in there comfortably, and I am actually able to sit with my feet underneath the seat, and my knees are pressed against the seat here, but I think I'd be comfy for a shorter trip. I wouldn't want to sit here for too long because the headroom's quite tight too, but it's actually pretty acceptable. I just think it'd be nicer if your feet could go a little bit lower, but in fairness, for what it is, I think this is pretty decent. If you've got kids back here, they're going to be absolutely fine. Certainly for if you've got busy trips back and forth from school, or maybe to different clubs and you want to take other people's children too, then I think they're all going to be fine, particularly for shorter journeys. The Tarraco offers good levels of flexibility when it comes to boot space. Now, there are 230 litres to play with when you've got all of the seats in place, and I think that's pretty decent. And there's also this clever storage area for the parcel shelf, which keeps it outside and stowed away properly, because inevitably, if you don't have that, you leave it in the garage or in the house and then you forget about it. Now, lower the rear seats down, and that expands to 700 litres, and that's a very decent amount of boot space to play with. And if you are going to use this as occasional rear seats, then that means that you've got a very large boot nearly all of the time. And then of course you can take it one step further and fold the middle seats down, then you've got an even larger load area. In terms of practicality, the Tarraco does very well. If you're going to be carrying 7 people and all their luggage, you're going to want a pretty robust engine setup, and that's just what the Tarraco has. We've got a 2-litre turbocharged diesel engine with just under 200 brake horsepower, and it's all sent to the wheel via a 7-speed automatic gearbox. What's the setup like? Well, it's very pleasant. It's quite traditional in the way it delivers its power. There's a little bit of lag, but then you get a nice swell of torque, and it's really usable, and it feels like the right amount of power for a car of this size. Now, it says that you should get around 42.8 mpg, which I feel is pretty good for a car of this weight and this type. Now, of course, that's going to go down slightly when it is completely fully laden. And as we know with this car, there's a lot of space for all your things and for people. So expect to see, I'd reckon, about 40, late 30s, 40, when you've got it full of kit. I think something that's really clever with the Tarraco is that the seating position is actually quite a lot lower than you'd expect for a car of this size. Compared to something like a Discovery, where you feel really high up, this car is slightly lower and actually more like, well, an older MPV style seating position. Why is that clever? Well, if you're not used to driving a big SUV, you're going to feel more comfortable in this because you are slightly lower. It's slightly friendlier. And so if you're driving one of these for the first time, or if you're making the switch out of an MPV and into a big SUV, then that's going to feel slightly friendlier. You still get a good view of the road ahead. You're not certainly sat low down like you're in a sports car or a two-seater. But I just think having a more natural sense of the road ahead is really smart. That's what makes me quite enjoy driving this car. Refinement is pretty good. That grumbly engine does come into the cabins from time to time. The noise penetrates through. There's a little bit of road and wind noise generated, particularly from the wing mirrors, but it's not too bad. And on the motorway, this car is actually really settled and very refined, and I think that's where it really comes to the fore. The brakes are good, nice and effective, and the steering's pretty light too. It doesn't make it nervous or sharp, it just means that actually it makes it quite easy to dice through corners, and around town where, let's be honest, most people are going to be driving this type of car, it's quite easy to spin around. Something I will say that is a positive for the Tarraco is the visibility. This windscreen is really nice and wide, and despite it being, well, quite a long way away from you, the rear screen is really large too. But most importantly, over the shoulder, there's loads of glass there, so you're not too impacted by the pillars. Again, it makes it friendlier to drive, you can get accustomed to it nice and quickly, and you're not going to feel too shelled in by too many pillars. I think that's really, really good. Of course, you've got a variety of different modes to choose from. You've got normal, you've got sport. If you really wanted to put it in sport, I don't see the need for it in this car particularly. And you've also got some off-road modes which will help tailor the amount of power that's going to each wheel depending on which one has the most amount of grip. Of course, you will have to combine that with the proper tyres, because the tyres will undermine any type of system that you have. So I think this car, equipped with a nice set of winter tyres during the winter time, which, funny enough, we're driving in, will actually prove pretty good when it comes to tackling snow or even just slippery surfaces. And in fact, for what is quite a long car, I've found the turning circle on the Tarraco to not be too bad, and the dimensions of it are quite square, so positioning it into a car park or into a supermarket parking bay is pretty simple. You've got a nice variety of cameras and sensors to help you, of course, but just the fundamentals are nice and simple in this car. It's square, it's easy to park, nice light steering, so around town you're not going to feel too cumbersome. Of course, one of those tight old multi-storey car parks is still going to feel a little bit stressful in a car like this, but for everything else I think the Tarraco is going to be just fine. I really like the Tarraco. It's got all of those features that you want from a family car. It's got practicality, it's got loads of cool functions, and it's nice and quiet and refined too. Plus, the addition of those extra seats in the back means that it's got extra versatility if you are looking at taking more family members or even just taking more people from time to time. The good news is though that this facelift doesn't change the fundamentals of what made the Tarraco so good in the first place. So if you are wanting to save a bit of money, then finding one of these on the used market is a great idea. Thank you for watching this Motors.co.uk new car review on the SEAT Tarraco. Now, let us know what you think of this car. Would you pick it over something like a Land Rover Discovery or even a traditional MPV on the used market? Let us know in the comments section below. and leave us a like if you can. Plus, while you're here, please remember to subscribe to the Motors.co.uk YouTube channel, hitting that bell icon so you're notified every time we upload a new review.